Hi, I'm Sijia, PhD student from UC Berkeley. Today, I'm going to present our work, which uses restorative justice approach to understanding adolescents' needs for addressing online harm. How do we pursue justice when online harm occurs? Most online platforms use content moderation, which includes a series of actions towards the person who conducts offense, including removal of their content or banning. The content moderation approach follows a punitive justice framework, which centers offenders and regulates their behavior through punishment. However, it leaves victims out of the decision-making process and fails to adapt to their individual experiences and needs. In recent years, researchers have started to explore a victim-centered perspective to address online harm. Restorative justice is one justice framework that gives victims agency and voice in deciding how to address the harm. It argues that victims often have multiple needs that are unaddressed in punitive justice process, such as the need for information or truth-telling. In addition, addressing those needs may require the collective effort of multiple stakeholders, including regulators, offenders, or community members. We focus our investigation on adolescents, who are a particularly vulnerable group for harms in the online space. Restorative justice has been successfully applied to address offline harm for adolescents in schools. In this research, we look at how restorative justice may help us understand adolescents' needs in the online context. We interviewed 28 adolescents who experienced online harm when they were 10 to 20 years old. The harm cases happened on multiple social media platforms, and half of the cases have an offline part in school. We examined three different interrelated perspectives of needs from adolescents: what, how, and when. What refers to type of needs, for example, the need for information or emotional support. How refers to how needs can be met through the actions and the stakeholders who perform the action. For example, victims may hope that moderators can ban the offenders. When refers to timing to meet the needs. For example, some needs are more urgent than others, or the order may matter. For example, need A may provide conditions to meet need B. We conducted an interview and design task to understand the three perspectives of needs. We've detailed the task in the paper. Next, we present our findings on the types of needs, actions, and stakeholders participants identified. The table is a summary of results. The first column shows the 5 needs participants identified, including the need of sense-making, emotional support and validation, retribution, safety, and transformation. The second column shows the actions that can meet the needs. The following columns checkmark the stakeholders that can perform those actions. For example, the first row shows that to meet the sense-making need, participants hope the offenders can let them understand the motives for conducting harm. For this presentation, we mainly try to situate content moderation and online platforms in the results. How does content moderation help address victims' needs? We find that platforms moderation meet retribution and safety needs, which is a finding that aligns with previous literature. However, only some participants choose to use content moderation to meet those needs. For example, for safety needs, some participants hope to ensure safety by helping the offenders understand the harm and their wrongdoing. Some other participants think that the online community members can give offenders a kind of public accountability by calling offenders out or reporting them. Besides, there are needs content moderation doesn't address, such as the need for sense-making. What else can online platforms do besides content moderation? We find that online platforms actually have a role in all 5 needs. For example, for sense-making, participants think that platforms can give advice and instructions on how to address the harm. For transformation needs, participants believe that platforms should continuously improve their design for prevention of harm or more individualized solutions. Importantly, we're not suggesting that platforms can or should meet all needs. We find that addressing online harm needs effort from multiple stakeholders online and offline. For example, for our adolescents participants, many harms happen online, but with their school friends. Thus, they often need help from the school, parents, or classmates. Next, we talk about the timing to meet different needs. We ask each participant to visualize a timeline to address their needs. In the graph, we color-coded the categories of needs on the timeline. We can see that participants usually attempt to meet the need of sense-making first. However, a smaller number of participants in our sample chose to stop the continuation of harm before making sense of it. Then, the need for emotional support is dominant and happens at an early stage. Several participants believe receiving emotional support is urgent after the trauma of harm, and one also mentioned that they need emotional support before confronting the offenders. We can see that the need for safety is kind of scattered in the graph. However, when we broke down the needs into actions in data analysis, we found a clearer pattern. For participants who hope to stop the harm immediately, they usually rely on platform moderation. When participants hope to stop the harm through talking with offenders and gain their understanding, it usually happens or is finally achieved at a later stage of the timeline. And needs for retribution and transformation come last. We find that needs for punishing the offenders is not the central goal for many participants. Only less than half of our participants include the need, and they usually place it after meeting the need for sense-making, emotional support, and validation, and safety. Finally, participants usually describe transformation, such as raising public awareness, as a long-term goal and place it at the end. Finally, we want to mention some major lessons and implications from this research. Following restorative justice, we centered victims' agency and voice and identified 5 needs adolescents have for addressing online harm: sense-making, support and validation, safety, retribution, and transformation. We also identified relevant stakeholders and actions to meet those needs. Following these findings, we argue for an expansion of the scope of needs, actions, and stakeholders in addressing online harm. We found that victims often need more than what platforms' content moderation can provide. In many cases, victims require actions from multiple stakeholders, online and offline. We find that this is particularly important for adolescents whose online harm experiences may happen between schoolmates or even include an offline component on the school grounds. Many participants identified actions that align with offline restorative justice values and practices. For example, talking with offenders or emotional support from community members. In our future work, we would like to explore different implementations of restorative justice practices in online communities. Additionally, our research provides a way to see harm as a temporal process. Participants' process of addressing needs often involves a series of actions over time. We find that some needs are more urgent than others, and needs may be dependent on each other. Thus, it is important to consider both the relation of needs and the timing of meeting each need. In particular, our research also highlights moderation efficiency in ensuring safety needs. Finally, we want to reflect on how the restorative justice approach centers on the needs of victims in their own context. Our research shows the importance of giving victims agency to specify how they would want to deal with the harm. However, centering victims' needs doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. For example, some participants want their offenders to suffer severely, but it may be against restorative justice values or our values as a community. We argue that when providing victims agency, it is equally important to meet their needs, like safety or sense-making, within established community values. In addition, we also find it challenging for victims to come up with needs immediately. Throughout our task, participants went back and forth and come up with new ideas on the go. In fact, sense-making is one of the needs they identified. Thus, while providing victims agency, it is equally important to provide support and guidance along the way. Thank you.